experience Week 10 DraftKings picks in preview. Joining me on the line to break this all down from Roto Grinders, from RotoViz, and FantasyADHD.com, it is Josh ADHD. What's going on, dude?
Not much, Pat. How are you doing?
Oh, listen, we're into Week 10 now. I feel like I've got a solid string of losing picks for the past few weeks. I'm ready to flush those out of my system. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I've had pretty polar rosters the last few weeks where I've hit chalk and I've hit some really good picks, and then I've got a couple of guys on the roster that just boat anchor the whole thing.
Yeah, and that tends to happen. Like I told you, it just takes one big week and then all problems are cured.
Exactly.
So let's see if we
get it.
Yeah, let's see if we can find some at least decent plays this week to help us tread water a little bit. Maybe some min cashes. Maybe someone out there can take home the big money. But I'm just going to focus on min cashing for the moment and then try to build off that momentum. But we'll see. What did you make of the pricing this week? Do you find it favors any one position? Do you find it to be too tight? Because that's been sort of the thing so far this season, is that without massive injuries happening and it opening up, and DraftKings now pricing a lot of the players where they would be priced if the person in front of them got injured, that there's no super big values. We got Chris Ivory last week when the Fournette news came out, but that was really about it. Do you see any sort of soft spot in the pricing this week?
You know, I really don't see it yet. I think it's going to be a lot like last week, where we're going to depend on, late week injuries to come in and give us the value and open the door for some positions. And obviously, we don't know where that's going to be yet. There is some question at Dallas at wide receiver. I'm sure we'll hit that in a few minutes. And, I think there's an opportunity there potentially. But right now, I don't see anything. But I do think we have a lot of flexibility on roster builds this week, which is good. That means that we're going to get a lot more spread in tournaments and in terms of how people put things together.
Yeah, so everyone check back on Friday with the DraftKings Ownership Projection Show. We'll be integrating the Fanshare Sports tags, and I'll be breaking it down along with the injuries to find out where people are gravitating to at each position. That comes out Friday night. You want to check that out? Check it out on Saturday if you want to, or Sunday morning. Let's get into running backs. Right now, Pittsburgh's back on the slate, which means Lev Bell is the highest priced running back. He is $9,800, and the top 10, there's a lot of gap between salaries here. You got Bell, he's at 9.8. You got Elliott, he's at 9.7. Gurley is right there next to him at 8.7. Then you have Fournette at 8.4, McCoy at 8.3. Then there's a big drop down to Ingram, Melvin Gordon, Alvin Kamara, and then Jerick McKinnon. Somehow Aaron Jones is still priced at $6,400, but I don't know how great of a play that's going to be. But when you look at the top of the running backs, like you have Todd Gurley, and if you look at opponent rank on the DraftKings site, it's going to say Houston, the number one defense in not giving up points to running backs. That wouldn't really scare me off Todd Gurley all that much. Like, is he the play at the top, or would you go all the way up to Bell in a gravy matchup against Indianapolis?
I do like Bell quite a bit this week. He does have a tough matchup against Indianapolis. Surprisingly, they are one of the stronger run defenses in the league, but I think that may be a bit of a fallacy because they are so weak against the pass. We saw that last week with Houston, even though Savage really struggled. You could tell that they had places to throw the ball. Savage just couldn't make it happen. So far as Gurley is concerned this week, my numbers still show that Houston is a relatively tough rush defense. I don't buy it so much anymore, especially with Gurley being a pass receiver in that offense. He's getting 4 or 5 targets a game typically. I think that adds a lot of value to what he can do. And I think for this week especially, I think he and Bell are pretty common ground and pretty evenly I don't want to say priced, but they're evenly projected, at least by my numbers.
All right, so if they're going to be evenly projected, you just take the $1,100 savings and go with Gurley if that was your choice?
I think so. I do think a lot of people will probably opt for Bell as a, you'd say contrarian play. They're probably going to play Bell in cash because they trust Bell and they know what Bell's going to do, especially when he's away from home, where they tend to lean on Bell a little bit more. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have similar ownership in games this week. I will probably lean toward Gurley, though, for the savings.
Would you put Elliott in that mix as top producing running backs of the week?
I think you have to put Elliott in the conversation because if he's allowed to play, he's going to get the volume. And for all intents and purposes, it's good volume. And so I think Elliott's going to be right in the conversation. He's right there with Gurley at price. It's going to be kind of a coin flip on Sunday, what you choose to do.
As of Wednesday, both Terrence Williams and Dez Bryant are not practicing, so they could be without their number 1 and number 2 receiver. Now, sure, that might open up playing Cole Beasley, playing Bryce Butler, that kind of thing, but what sort of effect do you think that would have on Elliott? Do you think it's just more carries for him?
Yeah, I think if anything, it'll be a little more work for him. They'll try to play an even more conservative game plan than they typically play. So, maybe they knock him up 3 or 4 carries and a couple of targets. For Elliott's sake, I don't think the volume increase is significant.
Well, I mean, he doesn't need a significant increase in volume. He just needs to keep maintaining the volume that he currently has.
Exactly. Yeah, and if he maintains the efficiency he's had the past 3 games, I think he'll be just fine if you want him as your top running back this week.
All right, so if we drop down a little bit more, you got like your Fournette. Obviously, he sat out last week. Now he's playing the Chargers, which is a weaker run defense as opposed to a pass defense. Shady coming off like an all-time stinker last Thursday night, 25 yards against the Jets. He's playing the Saints. The Saints now have this reputation that they're a really good defense. Is McCoy, I would project him to be the lowest owned, basically, of all these guys, probably him and Ingram. Is McCoy in a decent rebound spot here, especially with no one really wanting to take him? Like, I would think that people are going to just drop down to Kamara. He's cheaper, he's been better, and he's getting so much run, especially through the passing game. And even in my mind, he's probably a better play. But if you're just playing ownership in the spot in giant GPPs, does McCoy make a little bit of sense?
I think he does make a lot of sense from an ownership perspective. New Orleans, they rank as one of my top rush defenses. And although Buffalo is a very strong rush offense, the fact that they have to go to New Orleans to play the Saints at home, I think is going to get a lot of people off of Shady. Unless they think for some reason, unless they're chasing the pass game, which we were chasing last week when they played the Jets, and it obviously didn't come to fruition. So, I do think there will be some people on McCoy. They will have a lot of bad taste in their mouth, though, so I'm probably going to eschew him and go toward, probably not Ingram, but maybe they might drop down even to Melvin Gordon, or they'll hop onto Fournette, thinking Fournette's just going to come in and slam the Chargers. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out.
One of the big things about Fournette so far has been his ability to lean on these big plays, these big rushes and score touchdowns. That's saving some weeks that would be relatively mediocre for his price. But, every single week he comes out and churns out value. Does that have to end? Like, can we just bank on a 50-yard rushing touchdown from him every week? Because that's what people did with Kareem Hunt, and then it just stopped. And then Kareem Hunt wasn't really all that fantasy productive anymore.
Yeah, it's really hard to rely on splash plays. I mean, you want guys that are basically amassing yardage at 4 and 5 yard chunks, which Fournette can do that as well. But expecting him to haul off and get a long touchdown every week, you can't depend on that. So what you really need to look at for him is what's his yardage floor going to look like if we take those splash plays out, and it's still pretty healthy. The volume's there, certainly. He is getting some pass game work. So without the splash plays, I still think you have to look at him every week as an RB1, the guy that you're going to roster and pay a lot of money for.
Yeah, but if you were just really, just say like you only play like 5 or 6 lineups, like for me, I don't think that Fournette's going to make that cut. I think I might take a shot. Shady, Bills are better at home. It makes some sense to me. I don't love McCoy this week. I think objectively you take price out, ownership out. Fournette's probably a better play, but I still understand where the upside can come in with McCoy, especially if no one's on him. Like, I still think that Fournette didn't burn anyone last week because the news came out early enough that no one stayed on him, and then they just used Ivory and everything was fine, or they moved on to Elliott or whatever. I just feel like McCoy over Fournette in this spot might make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I don't have any issue with that argument. I messed up earlier saying that Buffalo was going to be on the road. I was looking at my numbers incorrectly. That's my fault. But the fact that Shady's going to be at home now against New Orleans, who typically they don't score as well outdoors, I think that makes him a much more compelling play than Fournette. And I think, for all the reasons that you just said. So I certainly can get behind that.
In the interest of paying down at running back, not all the way down, obviously, but if you want to take 2 mid-tier guys, you have like Kamara's only 69. I think he's a fine play. I still like Jarek every single week. The guy just continues to get involved volume-wise. There was that one Latavius Murray week. I wouldn't worry too much about that. And the pass defense for the Skins is actually quite good. I can see them keeping the ball on the ground, running some short A-dot routes to McKinnon through the passing game and giving him a solid floor. But it's Carlos Hyde at $6,300. Like every single week, he seems to be underpriced, and then no one really wants to use him. It's not like the Giants are a good defense. Like, people are just Darkwa. Give me Carlos Hyde. I think Carlos Hyde's in a great spot.
I was kind of surprised to see Hyde's price jump up this week versus last week. I think last week he was right around $5,900. He's got a $400 increase this week.
I think he was 50. He was $5,200 last week. Was
he 52? Okay, so it was criminally low for Hyde. They were just begging you to play him. This week they're going to make you think about it a little bit more because he's up near Kamara, McKinnon, and he's even priced just a little bit above Jordan Howard, who I want to talk about in a minute. Hyde at home against the Giants. I mean, you're basically paying a price to say, and you're taking the risk that the Giants have quit and they're going to go out to San Francisco and just get lambasted again. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case because San Francisco is so bad on defense and their offense really isn't all that good because they have Beathard at quarterback. I think this could be a little bit of a trap play.
Really?
So I do. Yeah, I do. Hyde is getting the volume, but we have seen this season where if Matt Breida is healthy, they brought him in and let him get a little more of the volume than you would think they would let him have. So if Breida's healthy, I'm certainly going to think a lot more about Hyde just because people may be slamming him in there, betting on the Giants quitting on their coach.
Well, I think a lot of people are going to go either with Hyde at 63, but from what I can gauge from around the industry, what people are asking me on Twitter, it really seems like everyone is all in on Orleans Darkwa at $4,500. But I watched Darkwa play. He doesn't seem like he's very good. I know it's a great spot, but if Wayne Gallman ended up playing 28 snaps in this game, or for whatever reason Vereen's on the field, I think there is substantial downside to Orleans Darkwa. Am I insane for thinking that?
No, I think you're absolutely on point with that. I looked pretty early last week just to see what the Giants were doing on offense, and pretty early in the game, Darkwa had 8 carries for 48 yards. I'm thinking, wow, he's got 6 yards a clip against the Rams. That's pretty good. And so that's kind of what's sticking in my mind right now about Darkwa going into this week is, obviously everybody's just pegging the Niners as this terrible run defense, which they are. And, Darkwa makes the most sense as kind of a cheap play if you want some salary relief at running back. But that also could be a trap spot because we saw what the Giants did on the road at Denver to that offense when they decided they wanted to come out and play. And they just totally shut that thing down. And that certainly happened again. So, sorry, and that was more about Hyde. I got a little bit ADHD there on you. So, but when we're looking at Darkwa getting out there, it's, I think it's a pure tourney play. I wouldn't put him in cash, although I think people will try to play him in cash just because he's cheap and they think it's cheap volume. But you're certainly right to say that the volume's tenuous because what we've seen is McAdoo from week to week to week. It's just we really don't know what he's going to do, but he is definitely going to do the most negative EV thing, and that could be giving Vereen 20 carries.
It's just kind of strange. I would almost go the other way with it. I would think that if I was to use Darkwa, which I will not be, and I'm willing to be perfectly wrong with this, it could be a tremendous play for all I know, and it just works out. But I think you can play him for the salary relief if you want to, because he'll be so highly owned in cash games that if he busts, he's busting for half the field. Now, if you want to pivot off of him because you think he's not going to be good, I understand that. But I think for tournaments, he's just going to be so highly owned that what are really the chances that he comes through with a week that wins you the week? 5%?
Yeah, and I think that's the best argument against Darkwa is just, his ceiling is so limited in that offense that, what you're really hoping for is 15 for 45 and a touchdown.
See, I would even think of it the other way. If everyone's going on to Darkwa, that means probably people are not going to have as many shares of Ingram or Sterling Shepard, for God forbid Eli Manning in the spot against a bad defense. If they decide to open it up, if somehow San Francisco can score early in this game or get up by 14, this could be a really good spot for the Giants' passing game.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good argument, and it's certainly an interesting way to look at that game is if the Niners get up, because really, when have they been up all year? But if for some reason we run this narrative that the Giants have quit and they get up there and they get down 2 scores, and obviously they're going to be calling that pass game. Who's going to get the catches? Yeah, I guess it's Vereen, but I just don't have a good enough feeling about anybody in that offense except for Evan Ingram to really roster any of them. To me, it's a low percentage tourney play.
See, I actually think that Sterling Shepard, after we saw it last week where the targets even late in the game just started filtering between Ingram and Shepard, and that was basically about it. I know that King ended up with the touchdown, but just when we're talking about volume, I think that Sterling Shepard is a pretty safe floor player, and if he can find his way into the end zone, he actually makes a very good tournament play.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
All right, you want to talk about Jordan Howard. Sell me on Jordan Howard this week, because I think the case can probably easily be made.
Yeah, and I think this is Jordan Howard's going to be a chalk guy this week, in my opinion, at his price. Especially, we were talking about Carlos Hyde at $6,300, and we can drop down $200 and get Howard, who we're pretty confident is going to have 24 touches in his game. He's probably going to get, I would say, 4 or 5 targets. We know Green Bay is not good against receiving backs, so from that end, it could be a mix of Cohen and Howard. in the receiving game at running back. But we do know that Howard gets a fair share of targets. We know he's going to get the carry volume. And for 6,100, you're going to take a chance on him getting 1 or 2 touchdowns. And so to me, his ceiling at 6,100 is something totally worth chasing. And I think it's probably on par with what we might get out of Mark Ingram or even Leonard Fournette this week.
So he's sort of like the cheaper version of those two guys?
I think so.
Would you throw Devonta Freeman into this mix too, maybe as if Jordan Howard is going to be super chalky? Would he be the logical pivot to, A, save some money and not go up to Hyde, who might also be popular and who you think could be a trap in this spot? But Freeman, before the bye week and before he dinged up his shoulder, was inching up towards like 60, 65, 70% snap rate and getting all these carries over Coleman, and it's kind of flipped back the other way. But if he's actually healthy this week and practices in full, this seems like an excellent spot against the Cowboys.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, the story you have to tell yourself here is that Atlanta's going to come out and be pretty efficient on offense. They've been efficient on offense this year. They just haven't scored at the same rates that they did last season. And you're betting on Dallas playing a worse defensive game than they did against the Chiefs last week. They were phenomenal against the Chiefs. They owned the offensive line of the Chiefs and just totally crashed that running game. And obviously we saw what happened that, I think Kareem Hunt ended up with only 9 carries through the whole game, but it's just totally crazy. So, could that happen to Freeman this week? I think it certainly could. I think he has a really low floor this week if the Dallas defense continues to come out and be pretty stout against the run, which they have been. So what I think you're depending on with Freeman is pass volume. And to me, I really don't have a good feel for what Atlanta's going to do in that sense. You mentioned Freeman's health. He's still got a Q tag. I'm probably going to avoid that situation. To me, he's also just a tournament play, whereas I think Howard's a cash play. And I'm going to be looking at Freeman, probably a low percentage, but a high ceiling guy, but also like just a total floor guy. He could get you 2 points this week, I think, if things shake out the wrong way.
So based on what you've said, your favorite play of the week at running back is basically Jordan Howard.
I think so. At this point, I'm still pretty early in my process, but right now I'm looking at Howard thinking that he's going to be the guy that I wanted Mark Ingram to be last week.
So if I was building a cash game roster and I had to save and not go all the way to the very top at running back, do you think a backfield of Kamara and Jordan Howard makes sense for the savings?
I think so. Yeah, you could absolutely do that. Or, you could look at McKinnon and Howard as well. But yeah, something along those lines where you're looking at 2 guys in the 6s as opposed to paying up to the 8s to get one of the bell cows. All
right, is there anyone below that number? I mean, we touched on Orleans Darkwa. I'm not really in. I don't trust the volume, but I understand why people are all over it. Great matchup. He's put up like 70 yards before. Like, whoa, Orleans Darkwa, he's the greatest. But he's $4,500. That's the intriguing part. For me, I think I would rather play Matt Forte at $4,400. At least I know that he has a base. Matt Forte has become what I thought Bilal Powell would be coming into the year.
Yeah, that's looking at Forte at 4,400. That's really interesting, and I think that's a pretty sharp play in my opinion. Just because people are still off of him, I think a lot of folks still think Powell's the guy in that offense. When we saw last week, Forte got 2 touchdowns and he got a lot of the volume. So I really dig that pick there, and I could certainly see that being a really smart play as either a flex or as your RB2 if you really want to go super cheap at running back.
Are you sold on Ty Montgomery having retaken this job back from Aaron Jones? Because if that's the case, then he's at a very nice price at $4,300. But was that game flow dependent with them being down by so much to Detroit so early that they put in the better receiving back? In this game against the Bears, well, the Bears are favored by like 5.5 points. I mean, it's not like the Bears offense is going to go and put up 30 on you real quick. Like, it seems like Jones might retake the snap count lead this week with the game being a little bit closer and them trying to shorten the clock.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think Jones is going to be the guy this week. I think this is going to end up being a really ugly game that, like a 16-13 game, even if these teams can get in the end zone. And if that's the case, if it's close like that, I think they're just going to pound Jones and they'll bring Montgomery in probably to spell Jones and do a little receiving work. But I can't play Montgomery this week. I just don't trust that offense right now.
Duke Johnson, $4,100. He passed concussion protocol. He's been off for the week. He gets the Lions. The Lions are a better defense than I think people give them credit for, but they're not elite. And if this is a game where, again, Detroit can hop out to a lead, which they've been doing, and especially against the Browns since they play every snap from behind, if Kaiser's forced to pass in this spot, Duke Johnson has been better with Kaiser under center. Now, if they fall behind here early, almost like Forte, I think the reception base for Duke Johnson can be intriguing. We know that he has big play play upside. I don't know if I'd use him in tournaments, and in cash games, I'm a bit iffy. Do you have any feelings about Duke Johnson?
Oh, man, I feel so bad about this Cleveland offense right now that I have a hard time rostering them, even at these low prices. And it's I agree. I think he's a tournament play. I question his ceiling unless Detroit gets out to, let's say, a 21-point lead at some point, which is entirely possible. And then, you see Duke Johnson, let's say he gets double-digit targets. He turns into Christian McCaffrey this week. And, he could certainly put up, let's say, 16 DraftKings points with a lot of receptions. But it's just, man, I really don't like this offense. The stench is so foul coming out of Cleveland right now that I'd have a hard time rostering any of these guys. Now, I would say this. If Duke Johnson was $500 cheaper this week, I'd think a lot more about it. But at $4,000, I'm either going to look at Forte, like you mentioned, or I'm going to bump down to Riddick at 4K and play the opposite side of the ball.
So do you think that Riddick possesses a higher ceiling than Duke Johnson on the spot?
I do, yes.
Okay. I think I can buy that too. Riddick was the one guy that I was looking at down there. Maybe Marlon Mack at $3,800 just because of game flow situation back on the turf in Indy. That I know Gore ended up ahead of him in the snap count last week, but that's, I think, because that they were winning in that game.
Yeah, there's an interesting guy down here that I would think about in tournaments, and that's Rob Kelly.
Really?
At 3,400, yes, at 3,400. The good thing about this game is it's in Minnesota, but they're playing it indoors, so the weather's not going to affect this game. And if their offensive line's a little bit healthier this week and they have a little bit more of a, let's say, a suitable offense, closer to what we expect them to play, then I think it's possible Kelly falls in the end zone 2 times. And if he can fall in the end zone 2 times, then to me, that's a total win. That's a tournament win at $3,400.
Now you've kind of sold me on that. Tournament only, but I don't want to get people confused that, you can't play him in cash games because of his, 0-point potential, right?
No, yeah, exactly right. He could totally Yahtzee.
All right, so let's switch to receivers. I mentioned the Dez news off the top. So Dez isn't practicing. Williams isn't practicing. There's no word yet on whether they're going to play or not. So let's run a scenario where they do play. So Dez is active. Do you use Dez?
I don't think so. My opinion is that Dallas is going to just take the path of least resistance. Now, they are going to pump a bunch of targets Dez's way. He's been one of the most targeted receivers in the league, and I'm still probably going to shy away from him. Let me check his price again real quick. $6,900. So he's up $500 from last week when he was in a total catbird spot, and he totally killed it for everybody. He didn't do anything. And they, obviously that Williams and Beasley had their blow-up weeks. I'm probably going to fade him this week. Even with all the injuries, he's talking about his ankles are hurt, and he's got a few things nagging him now. It's going to be really hard to pay $6,900 for him when I could use guys like Golden Tate, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, Marvin Jones, all sitting there right below him, a couple $100 below him. That's to me, they're in much more palatable situations.
All right, well, let's run a scenario where Dez sits, but Terrence Williams plays. Would you then move on to Terrence Williams at $4,400?
I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because Terrence Williams is a bad football player. And, last week was that was just the total ultimate situation for him where he actually catches 7 balls and then has all of this yak come after it. All of his catches were pretty short. And he managed to just get away and run upfield with those. And I wouldn't bet on that happening again this week. The Atlanta defense has not been all that great this year. That's probably one of the weakest parts of their team right now is they're letting offenses do a lot of what they want to do, but I still don't think Terrence Williams is good enough to exploit that.
All right, so let's say that one of those 2 guys are out, or they're both out. Would that move you on to Beasley or Bryce Butler at $4,000?
I would certainly look at Bryce Butler, and the reason I say that is because he's shown the ability to get downfield and make big plays. And at $4,000, that's all you're looking for is a big splash play. Maybe he gets like a 50 or 60-yard touchdown out of something. That pays it off right there. And that's the kind of expectation you need when you're playing a guy like Bryce Butler. The other interesting player that may be worth looking at for Dallas, actually there's a couple, depends on who they call up if Dez sits, is one is obviously it's going to be Ryan Switzer, who will probably step into the slot role and suck up a lot of targets. As a kid they really like. They drafted him this year. He's a rookie. And I don't see any situation where if he's on the field, he doesn't get, let's say, 6 or 7 targets. So I'm trying to find him right now. He's probably way, way down here at the bottom. Oh, yeah, there he is. So he's down at $3K, min price. So if he's on the field for Dallas and you're choosing between him and Cole Beasley, to me it's a no-brainer, and you go with Switzer.
But
The other player for
is there a situation that occurs where Switzer doesn't really get himself into the game unless Beasley is out to take over that slot role?
Well, I think my opinion is what's going to happen is they'll probably have both of those guys on the field if Dez sits. And if that's the case, and this is going to be predicated on them going probably 4 or 5 wide in some situations, I think Switzer has the ability to get a touchdown.
Okay.
And so the scenario I'm talking about is if Williams sits and Dez sits, then I think Switzer has to be looked at strongly as a tournament play.
Okay.
Because he's at min price, he's a guy that could come in and, let's say, get 7 targets and maybe score a touchdown, which is, I mean, that's fantastic for 3K. That's what you want. And that was what we wanted out of Demarcus Robinson last week and failed to get. But that's kind of what we're looking at here.
And who is the other player?
Noah Brown. So Noah Brown's another guy that they brought in this year. He's a pretty interesting player. He's a big-bodied guy. He's built very similar to Dez Bryant. And if they actually call on him to come in the game, and this is in the situation that Dez and Williams sit, then he's a player like Bryce Butler that could go out at a very cheap price and maybe get a touchdown and, let's say 60 or 70 yards on a couple of targets. He's just a splash play guy. But he's worth looking at $3,000 if it looks like he's going to play.
I think I would gravitate and just kind of stick with Bryce Butler at $4,000 for tournaments. And then if I was playing more and more lineups, if I got some information out of Dallas that these guys were going to start or see increased snaps, I think that's a very logical move. Both are the mid price.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go to the top of receivers then. Antonio Brown, number 1, he's $9,500. That's $1,500 more than Julio Jones, who did not practice on Wednesday. No word yet on if he's going to play, but I talked about this with Jake Seeley on Tuesday's show that he loves Mohamed Sanu against Dallas this week. But the caveat is Julio Jones has to play to stay on the outside to bump Sanu to the inside where he can really exploit Dallas. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that. Part of the MO for Dallas last year, and I studied it pretty closely, was they wanted to shut down the number 1 receiver in an offense and just defer all the targets to the secondary receivers. And this year, it doesn't seem that they're doing that as much, and that may be just a personnel deal and maybe a scheme deal. So if Julio sits, I still don't have a problem playing Sanu because the volume's going to be there. I think Sanu is good enough to beat Dallas's defense and get on the board if he needs to. But in the event Julio sits, I'm probably going to look really hard at Taylor Gabriel because I think he's going to rotate into the slot at that point. Obviously, they kind of use him in a little bit of a gadget role already. But if Taylor Gabriel is going to get, let's say, 7, 8, 9 targets at $3,500, he's going to be almost a jam play against the Dallas defense, in my opinion.
Well, Gabriel comes in at $3,500. I would think that someone even like Justin Hardy might end up taking that slot role on a more permanent basis should Julio sit, and he's actually the min price right now.
God, Justin Hardy, man. I'd have a hard time doing that, but it's a very compelling case. It's whoever gets in that slot is going to be the guy that eats more than likely.
Well, I mean, at $5,100, can we agree that Sanu, regardless of what happens, is a pretty good play?
I think so, absolutely. All
right, so you have Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, and then you go down to A.J. Green, DeAndre Hopkins. Evans is sitting, of course. He's $7,100. Thomas, Dez, Tate, Thielen, Diggs, Marv Jones at $6,200. It might maybe call it recency bias, but Marvin Jones has been really good for like a month now, and now he gets a super soft matchup. He's only $6,200. I'm going to be using a lot of him because I expect him to be one of the highest owned players on this slate. So I'm going to have to go overweight on him anyway, but I love Marvin Jones here.
Yeah, and the case for Marvin Jones is that Cleveland plays a competitive game on offense and is able to keep pace with Detroit. So if that's not the case, though, let's say Detroit gets out in front and they want to salt away the clock in the second half, Marvin Jones' target share is going to go way down, in my opinion. Granted, he did have a huge week last week against Green Bay, and they had a big, obviously they had a big lead almost the entire game. So there might be a case there to say, well, even if they're up 3 touchdowns, they're still going to be throwing the ball a bit and giving it to Jones. So at $6,200, I think he's going to be a great play. Golden Tate's only $600 more. I think Tate's probably going to be a really good pivot off of Jones, since Jones is kind of the flashy toy at this point. If you want to get a part of the Detroit offense, I'd look at Tate or maybe even a player like TJ Jones if you want to get really, really low price.
Yeah, I think that depends on if Kenny Golladay sits or not, again, obviously in terms of playing time. But I think one of the things about if Detroit gets up by a bunch, I don't even know if the market share goes down all that much for some of these receivers because Detroit can't run the ball.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that may have been the case last week when they were ahead and they just opted to pass because that was the best way for them to get the ball down the field. I need to look at my numbers. I think Cleveland is actually relatively stout against the run. And if that's the case, they may just defer to the passing game and just spread it around a bit more. So, at 6,200, I think Jones certainly has a 2-touchdown game in him. He could hit a massive ceiling again like he did last week. I think it's a great play.
Someone like Golden Tate, eventually he's going to have good luck in the red zone and not get stopped at the 1-yard line all the time, right?
Yeah, it's got to happen.
So if that's the case, maybe you're right. Maybe Golden Tate is the pivot play off of him. You still get exposure to that Lions offense, which everyone seems to be all over in this spot. And if you're going to have the second most popular guy instead of the most popular guy, I mean, hell, you could probably triple stack them if you want. But I think just as a solo play, maybe you're right. Maybe Tate possesses the same upside if things would finally break his way a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, to me, if you really want that Detroit passing game, for tournaments this week, I would probably go with the Tate ownership over the Marvin Jones ownership just to be a pure poker play there.
What do you make of A.J. Green at $7,700? Obviously, he's not suspended, was ejected last week. This is a sweet matchup for him, and it seems like people don't want to play him. But out of all these high price, obviously Antonio Brown's the best, but he's $1,500 more than everyone else. I think out of all the top guys, that A.J. Green's the best play.
Yeah, and I think he's probably going to be the chalkiest wide receiver on the roster by the end of the week.
He's
going
to
be my number one play at wide receiver.
Do you think?
I think as we get through the week, I think we're going to see that he's going to be the best play because the Tennessee pass defense is still bad. I think they're probably number 7 or 8 by my numbers, and Green is going to get the volume. I mean, he's still hacked off after last week. He was having a pretty good game last week up until the ejection. Even though the numbers didn't necessarily reflect that. He was able to get open against Ramsey a couple times, which, in and of itself is pretty special. I think this week he just goes ham. And to me, that's a guy I'm going to have access to in every one of my lineups if I can.
Yeah, I love A.J. Green in this spot as well. You mentioned Diggs and Thielen earlier. I hate this matchup. I really do. Washington's pass D is legit good.
It is pretty good. And the key here is going to be who plays the slot. So if Thielen's in the slot, I'm going to be all over Thielen and let Diggs deal with Norman. Now, I think Diggs is a good enough player to get some over on Norman from time to time, and it'll be interesting to see whether Norman follows Diggs around the entire game or if he splits his coverage between Thielen and Diggs. But if Diggs is good to go, and it looks like he is, I'm probably going to be pretty heavily looking at Thielen just because Thielen out of the slot he's devastating.
But if you're stuck at the price point at $6,700 for Thielen or $6,800 for Tate, I would lean Tate in that situation because I'm not even sure Case Keenum makes it through this game. With Teddy Bridgewater being activated, I mean, there's a reason that they're doing that. And if let's say they get up by a bunch and Teddy has to come in, or Keenum struggles and then he has to get him in. I mean, it's a case not to play Case Keenum, not that you were anyway, but there could just be a lack of fluidity in that offense should they end up making a change in the spot, I think. And I think that hurts the overall upside of both these guys.
That's a pretty interesting case. I don't know if they're going to be quick to pull Keenum. It's going to depend. I guess it depends on how ready Teddy is, and we really don't have a good sense of that other than them putting Sam Bradford on IR this morning. That he must be close enough to play where they can get him on the game day roster. To me, this Minnesota-Washington game is a game that could be a 16-13 game, or it could be a 30-27 game. It could shoot out because both these offenses have enough firepower to have a shootout, and both defenses are good enough to where it could be just a total low-scoring game. So I think this is going to be a game that is worth loading up on in tournaments just because of the variance involved with it. I mean, this game could go crazy, and Thielen and Diggs could both go off and have a touchdown apiece and 100 yards.
This $5,000 range I find kind of intriguing because there's a couple plays that I really like. One that I really have no take on because I'm going to ask you about it because I have no idea. And a guy who I think is a pretty big trap, and that's Juju Smith-Schuster against Indy. Great spot, $5,600. You got Ben indoors. He's going to hit him deep. But now that Martavis Bryant is working his way back in, I just don't know how much faith I have in Smith-Schuster to perform here. He just could do nothing.
Yeah, I think if I'm going to play any part of the Pittsburgh pass offense this week, it's going to be Brown. I'll bite the pill and swallow and play Brown. 5,600 is just too much for me to play Schuster when I could look at guys like Sterling Shepard, Keelan Allen, and even Teddy Ginn to some degree, and Kelvin Benjamin. We'll see how that shakes out. But I see some players right around there that I'm going to roster ahead of Schuster.
Yeah,
And I love Schuster, but it's just too much this week.
So the guys that I like there, I really like Sterling Shepard at $5,500. I think he's an excellent play. I like Mohamed Sanu at $5,100. I like Robbie Anderson at $5,200 against this awful Tampa defense as well. But T.Y. Hilton is the one that I can't really figure out what to do with. He's $5,900, so he's underpriced for, I mean, we saw what his upside was last week, but when you go back and look at his game logs this year, it's 175 yards or it's nothing. And this is the best defense he's going to play all season long. So I can't figure out if people are going to be on him because of recency bias, or they're going to look at the matchup and be like, well, this is a terrible spot. I can't use T.Y. Hilton. Because I think if he's popular, he's someone you want to avoid.
Yeah, I think he's going to actually be pretty low owned based on where he is. I mean, he's surrounded by Diggs, Jones, Schuster, Shepard, Allen, and I think he's going to, out of that bunch of players, I think he'll be the lowest owned because Pittsburgh is a good defense, and the variance involved with T.Y. Hilton, like you said, it's boom or bust, thoroughly boom or bust, and it's hard to pay that much for a player like that and know that it's probably like a 10% chance of boom and 90% chance of bust when the players around him have so much better probability of hitting their ceilings.
Yeah.
So that's a guy, I won't be on him this week.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, obviously, cash game, no thank you. That would just be a disastrous play, potentially. And the three guys that I mentioned, I think, have very safe floors, plus possess the touchdown upside that can go along with it. Again, that's Sanu, that's Shepard, and Robbie Anderson. I kind of like your Ted Ginn call here. Just, is it weird that he's been better than Michael Thomas?
Well, it is, but, it's only because he scored touchdowns. And it's only because he's getting more yardage. But the thing is Michael Thomas has been really good. They just haven't had to use him, and he hasn't scored touchdowns. So touchdown regression is probably in Michael Thomas's favor. This might be the week for it to happen because Buffalo's pass defense, for all intents and purposes, isn't that good, and they've struggled against top light wide receivers. A.J. Green lit them up, and I expect Thomas will be able to light them up should that game get offense heavy. Now, the question is it going to happen? I don't know how heavy that game is going to be on offense. I think it could be low scoring as well.
Well, it's one of these things where if we talk about like contrarian plays and pivot plays, I always like to take high talent players in potentially bad spots or they've been struggling and kind of just hope that it comes back through and the talent exceeds what their performance has been so far. And Michael Thomas, I mean, when we scrolled through the names at the very top, he didn't even come up in conversation. Like, do you think that anyone is realistically going to play Michael Thomas? Because based on his performance, he's overvalued.
Yeah, I've been chasing that dragon every week this year. I've rostered Michael Thomas every single week this year, and I keep waiting on that week to hit. It just hasn't hit yet, but I'm probably going to keep chasing it this week because the players at his price range that I'm looking at, Dez is dinged up. Mike Evans, obviously, he's out. DeAndre Hopkins is going to turn back into, week one DeAndre Hopkins, which is not thoroughly productive. So in that price range, if I'm looking for a guy, I think Michael Thomas is the one to go with.
Anyone else below that $5,000 threshold that you think needs to be brought up? Like Robert Woods is $500 or is $5,000. He scored his first 2 touchdowns last week. I don't really know what his upside is. I like him the best of the Rams receivers, but if he's not scoring touchdowns, then he's not going to hit that upside. I'm never playing Sammy Watkins. I just don't do that. And real impressive week from Sammy last week. 2 targets and 1 long touchdown. I don't think that the Texans defense, while it's not great, is just going to leave him wide open down the field. That would make little sense. I think the only one not the only one I would really use, but Adam Humphries at $3,100 seems so safe to me, which means it has to be a bad play, but can you just use him in cash games?
Yeah, I think you could certainly use him in cash games because it seems like that's where a lot of the pass volume is going to go, obviously with Evans being out. So I would certainly look at Humphries pretty hard in that price range. One of the other players that really interests me, and he's just below that 5K, is Jermaine Kearse at 4,200, just because he would be a good pivot off of Robbie Anderson if you think that pass offense is going to have to put up a lot of points. And that's certainly possible because I think both of these teams are going to be slinging it around the field pretty much. And if you think they're going to be slinging it, then Kearse certainly has to be in the question as a guy that can get a touchdown and about 60 to 70 yards. And at 4,200, that's a fantastic payoff.
I think people are going to be on Corey Davis after seeing him make awesome catches last week, and he's a super rook, and he's cheap, but I don't like this matchup against Cincinnati.
No, I don't either. And, still for me, between the 2 receivers in Tennessee, I'm going to look at Rashard Matthews. He's $700 more, but that's a guy I trust a lot more. That's a guy I'm going to play in cash versus Davis. I think Davis is a great tournament play at his price. He's a guy that could come out in this game and get 2 touchdowns and 110 yards. We just don't know. But we have seen early in the season, they've thrown a lot of targets that kid's way, and that's the lifeblood of the wide receiver. So if he's going to get, let's say, 9 to 11 targets, it's really hard to turn away at 4K.
Can you buy any of the 49ers receivers with Beathard at quarterback?
Oh, do not want.
Even Goodwin?
Do not want. No, it's just really hard. The times I've watched the Niners this year, it's just that pass offense struggles so much, and it seems like they have shifted their passing offense pretty heavily to the running back. So, just draining those wide receiver targets, I just don't see a lot of upside in that game, and it's hard for me to, I'd say, go after a guy like Aldrick Robinson and think that he's going to get me a 20-point day. I just don't see it.
How about someone who was like $7,000 week one, now $3,500? Any love for Terrell Pryor? Because I have none.
I was hoping we were going to go here, and to me, Terrell Pryor is he's nuclear. I can't touch that guy right now. He's probably going to draw Xavier Rhodes, and we know what happens if Rhodes closed. So it's to me, I'm not touching that guy.
Is there any, would you go Doxson if Jamison Crowder plays? I feel like he would be in the best position, especially if Jordan Reed sits.
Yeah, I think Doxson would be okay because we've seen that he doesn't necessarily need a lot of volume to put up enough points where you feel, okay about playing him now. Again, he's going to be boom or bust, probably like he's 0 points or he's going to be maybe 9 or 10 points at his ceiling. And that's okay, but it's for tournaments, it's really hard to chase that, not knowing that he probably won't get to 20.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of mid-tier receivers that you can go to, especially in cash games, if you want to pay up at running back, if that was the game plan that you wanted to take. So what does that do to us at quarterback? With some of the bigger names out or banged up, even when you look at the pricing, Dak Prescott is the highest priced quarterback of the week. He's only $7,300, and Russell Wilson's not on this slate. Brady's not on this main slate. He's on the primetime slate. What do we do here? Because I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around anyone that's basically not Matt Stafford, but I know he's going to be 40% owned.
Yeah, and I think that's I think it's okay to chase Matt Stafford. Now, the question is going to be, do you play Matt naked or do you play him with his receivers? And, so that's where your variability of ownership is going to come up, is whether you go Detroit onslaught or you just play, Stafford naked. If I'm looking around that price range at Stafford, I think Goff's a super play this week. He's going to be at home versus Houston. Houston has they've got a kind of a crappy defense now. And I think Goff's going to be able to wing it around the field quite a bit. And if that game, let's say both teams manage to get into the 20s, I think Goff could still put up, let's say, 250 plus and a couple of touchdowns. And that's a good cash play, in my opinion.
But you could probably even go cheaper in cash. I don't love it, but Josh McCown, $6,100. He's been good.
Yeah, and he's going to be super chalky this week, I think, just because Tampa Bay's pass defense has been so bad. Obviously, there's a little bit of a revenge narrative here, and he's been good. I mean, flat out, he's been good. And they've converted over to this air raid offense, which is high percentage throws, but they're moving the ball down the field pretty efficiently. And McCown's a guy that could put up 3 touchdowns this week, and at $6,100, how can you not look at that pretty strongly?
Well, what if you took the other revenge narrative and just dropped down to Fitzpatrick?
Oh, my goodness. I don't know. Because, my last memory of Fitzpatrick in New York is throwing 6 interceptions, obviously. And a lot of people, that's going to be fresh on their mind still as well. So it's pretty interesting. What is Fitzpatrick down at this week? I'm having a hard time even finding him right now.
Fitzpatrick?
He must be pretty low.
Fitzpatrick is $4,900.
Yeah, $4,900. So I think he's going to be really popular as well. I think a lot of folks are probably going to think this game is going to get up into the upper 20s for both teams. And if that's the case, then it makes a lot of sense to look at Fitzpatrick as the pivot to McCown. Or if you're going to create, a couple lineups, then to have both of those guys as part of your ownership allocation. In that Fitzpatrick range, what I think is pretty interesting as a play is going to be, let's see, where'd he go? I think Case Keenum's going to be pretty interesting here. He's down at 4,800 right now. He might be a decent pivot to Fitzpatrick. That, like we said earlier, I think that game could get kind of in shootout mode. And if that's the case, Keenum should be winging it around the field. I think the Washington defense has enough holes in it that the Minnesota skill players can exploit it, and they can get down the field and put up some points.
What about Rivers being $4,900? I know he has the nut low matchup, but Bortles is at 48 in the same matchup. I guess the question is there any reason to pay down this far at quarterback? Some weeks there is because you can't afford everyone. But after talking through running backs and receivers, there seems to be enough viable options where you don't need to go scumming into this territory.
Yeah, I really don't see a reason here unless you want to go down to Kaiser, thinking that they're going to have to just play in catch-up mode the whole game, and he's going to be, mass a lot of points in garbage time at 4,600. And, he's bitten a lot of people this year, so I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think he'll be popular because of that. So it's really hard to look down here below the fives and find a quarterback that I really want to play this week.
Well, I think the two to look for are just above that threshold. I mentioned Eli Manning earlier. Like, I have no problem taking a shot on him. His upside might be limited because he's Eli, but he's not going to get a better matchup. And Andy Dalton, last time that Andy Dalton was a chalk play, he's so severely disappointed. No one's going to go back to him here. And like you mentioned, the Tennessee pass defense is awful. If you just play A.J. Green and then you play Andy Dalton, you could be good.
Yeah, and that's certainly a stack worth looking at because we know Dalton can put up 4 touchdowns in a game. We've seen him do it many, many times at 5,300. How can you resist that ceiling? Their pass offense by my numbers is right on average, and I think there's a lot of upside there to like. I think that's a good call.
Matt Ryan in a spot where people just don't use Matt Ryan anymore, but he has a good matchup.
Yeah, and I think Matt Ryan's kind of in purgatory this week in between the top signal callers and then the guys in that mid-price tier. So I think he'll probably be really low owned. And again, that's a game that could shoot out. So if that game shoots out, we think he's going to get 300 yards passing. I think he's certainly worth a very strong look because just looking at my implied numbers, he's got the second highest implied number of the week, which is, that's pretty strong.
So of the guys in that middle tier, whether we're talking about Roethlisberger, Ryan, Tyrod, McCown, Cousins, and Mariota, I'll even throw into that mix too, and he's been really bad. Is Ryan the best play, do you think, of that mid-tier?
I think he's the highest upside play.
I mean, that's what we're looking for, because I don't think anyone's going to use him in cash.
Yeah, I wouldn't use Ryan in cash either. But yeah, I think Ryan is probably the best guy out of that tier. You could probably make an argument for McCown, but we do know that there's some limitations with McCown as well. So, and we know that Ryan could go nuclear. So if we want that nuclear guy, I think Ryan's the one to look at in this tier.
The only other one I really wanted to talk about, we didn't really touch on Dak, but if he's going to be the most expensive guy, I think you can find equivalent value elsewhere. But Drew Brees has been kind of crappy from a fantasy perspective ever since they learned how to run the ball and play better defense. But is there going to be a week where Brees turns back into old Brees and has to throw the ball 45 times? I don't know if this is the spot, but I feel like one of those games is coming for him, and I want to be on him that week. Could this be the week?
I think it certainly could be the week. We've seen Buffalo has one of the weakest pass defenses to quarterback, and so him going on the road, his road numbers have actually been better this year than his home numbers, if you can believe that, whereas it's been conversely true in the past. So I think this is certainly a week to look to chase him if you don't want to go all the way up to Dak and you don't necessarily want to play Stafford. You want to pivot off Stafford or even Goff. I think Drew Brees is certainly worth a solid look here.
Let's move to tight ends. Evan Ingram is the #1 price tight end of the week. He's over $6,000, $6,200. It's about time that his pricing finally caught up to his production because he's just
blows my mind.
He's just been an auto put in your lineup every single week. He's been so fantastic, and now he gets a really nice matchup. But it's a lot to pay for a tight end if you're not saving money at some of the other positions. Like if you wanted to use A.J. Green and Todd Gurley or A.J. Green and Le'Veon Bell, you probably can't afford Evan Ingram in this spot. So it goes Ingram, then Doyle, Reed. We don't even know if he's going to play or not. Walker, ASJ, Vernon Davis, who loses his value if Jordan Reed ends up coming back. So that's a precarious spot. I like Charles Clay at $4,200 if he can go. Kyle Rudolph's not bad, but do I take the shot on Garrett Selleck with Kittle being out and playing the Giants? If the Giants just give up points to tight ends, why not just roll the dice there?
Oh my goodness, Garrett Selleck. Oh man. I don't know. I just don't know.
He is the min. He's $2,500.
We said the same thing last week about Higbee.
And it worked.
Can we play Higbee this week? And he scored a touchdown. He had a couple of targets, but he maximized that, right? So I think I can't remember how many weeks in a row now that the Giants have been scored on by a tight end. I think it's 6, but it's in a tournament at $2,500, I think you got to at least have a little bit of ownership on that guy.
And I think it actually works out better for Selleck. Now, obviously, Goff isn't throwing in the ball. That would be a more ideal situation than Beathard. However, they're probably either going to be in a competitive game or losing to the Giants because the Niners, they're not blowing anyone out like the Rams blew out the Giants last week. So they're going to be incentivized to pass a little bit so he could actually get a higher market share. And Selleck was playing more snaps than Kittle anyway.
Yeah, man, that's an interesting case, and that's something I hadn't thought about this week was going all the way down to Selleck. But it's you make a compelling case. I might have to think about it a little bit more.
Was there any other cheap tight end that you were looking at?
Oh man, yeah, there were a couple of guys I was looking at that were pretty interesting. Ebron at $3,100 against Cleveland. is a pretty interesting case for me. I like the matchup against Cleveland. Obviously, Ebron has been bad his whole career, but we've seen bad tight ends like Tyler Kroft come and blow up Cleveland. So I think this is a week to look at Eric Ebron as a tournament play, maybe even a cash play. I mean, because he could get, if we think Detroit's going to just pass the ball, then Ebron could certainly see, let's say, 5 or 6 targets, and he may turn that into 70 yards and a touchdown. So 3,100, I think Ebron's certainly a guy worth looking at. Looking through the list here, I've not seen a lot of other things in the low prices that I like all that much. So I'm probably going to side, Ebron is going to be probably my min level. Actually, I take it back. Austin Hooper, I don't know why I missed his name, but Austin Hooper is pretty interesting to me at 3K. Typically Sean Lee, when he plays in the defense for Dallas, he's pretty good about locking out the tight end and keeping their receiving numbers down. But if we do think that this is going to shoot out, then I think Hooper's certainly worth a look because that's a guy we know that can get downfield. And for 3K, if we think he can put up another 70 to 80 yard game with a touchdown, then he totally blows up that expectation there. That's great.
Two other guys that I kind of like, both from a tournament perspective. Hunter Henry was like mega chalk against the Patriots, did nothing. They go on by. Now against Jacksonville, a perceived bad spot. But tight ends can actually get to the middle of the field against Jacksonville. It's the one soft spot they sort of have in the passing game. And it could be, we know what his upside is. And his price is way down. Would you play Hunter Henry in any sort of GPP style formats?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Henry's certainly worth a look because, it's going to be path of least resistance. So if we think Keenan Allen's going to be in the slot and draw some targets, then it makes sense also that if they dedicate some of those defensive resources to Allen to kind of keep him quiet, that Henry's going to be able to eat a little bit himself. Otherwise, I just don't know how the Chargers are going to move the ball because they're going to be locked down on the outside. And we've seen with the additions that Jacksonville made at the trade deadline, they're locking down the run game pretty good too now. So I think Henry's going to be a path of least resistance guy. He certainly could eat. And another name right there just above him on price is Cameron Brate. I love Cameron Brate this week. I think he's in a really, really good spot. He has, I think, the number one projection for me for implied numbers for tight ends. And that's just because the Jets aren't that great at tight end. And Tampa Bay's been really good about throwing to the tight end. Obviously, there's the Harvard narrative there, too, between Fitzpatrick and Brate. And, Brate's been so good, it's really hard for me not to roster him this week.
Do you worry that it could just be O.J. Howard who ends up with a big play and then Brate kind of gets boxed out? Or is with Evans being out that it's pretty solid for him?
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible that he gets boxed out. But the times I've seen O.J. Howard blow up this year was, Buffalo, he scored 2 touchdowns. They opted not to cover him at all. And I think the other time when O.J. Howard scored, it was a total busted coverage that time as well. So, Brate still gets the volume. And with Evans being out, I can only see Brate's volume going up a couple of targets, maybe 3 targets. So if we're looking at a 10-target game for Brate at 4,100, I think that's certainly worth chasing.
Last guy I wanted to talk about, he's the min price, $2,500, and this kind of depends on the health of C.J. Fedorowicz, who was activated from the short-term IR earlier this morning, but there's no word yet on if he's actually going to play or not in Week 10 against the Rams. But Steven Anderson actually soaked up 6 targets from Tom Savage last week, and Tom Savage struggles to complete passes, but this can be an absolute garbage time situation. We saw Tommy Savage get going against the prevent D of Indy last week. I mean, the Rams could be in prevent D halfway through the second quarter here. And Steven Anderson, if he's going to be the one on the field who at least seems to have some rapport with Savage, I think he's a talented player. And if he's a talented player, he could sneak his way into the end zone. He had 6 targets last week. He had 4 for 44. And he's the min price. Like, he doesn't really need to do much. And if he gets in the end zone with this, boom, like you're dancing with a guy who's less than 1% owned.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic case for Steven Anderson. I was going to mention before you did that he's a super athlete.
Yeah,
I think he has a pretty high spark score, especially for a tight end. And I noticed, like you did last week, that he soaked up a lot of volume when things got out of hand in Houston. So, your idea to play him at min price, I think that's an awesome idea and something certainly worth looking at. In fact, I would look at him before I looked at Selleck.
I just feel like the Selleck narrative may get overplayed a little bit because of how many touchdowns that the Giants have actually given up to tight ends. I would think that, we don't even know what Selleck's role in this offense is going to be, but if Fedorowicz plays, I probably wouldn't use Anderson.
Yeah, absolutely not. Can't do it.
All right, let's switch to defenses, the only thing that I ever do well. So there's 4 this week, and listen, I throw it out there. It's not super complicated that I look at the top 10 in DVOA pass rush versus the bottom 10 DVOA offensive line. That tends to work out pretty well, especially in passing situations where one team's going to have to pass a bunch, then boom. You just get opportunity after opportunity for your defense to score points. The ones this week, and I don't know if the Football Outsiders has updated yet. We're through week 9. So yeah, the Steelers have the best matchup of anyone this week with the best pass rush going up against the worst offensive line in Indianapolis. They're $3,700. The Rams rate out as well, the Saints, and then the Bears. Those 4 defenses are the 4 defenses I'm going to use. I don't care if they're the 4 chalkiest defenses. I just think objectively they're the 4 best plays of the week.
Yeah, I think you're on point there. Another team I would look at a defense. I would look at Detroit a little bit. Now, granted, they've been priced way up, but they might be a decent contrarian play on the other high-priced defenses we talked about: Pittsburgh, the Rams, and then New Orleans. One of the other defenses I was looking at, kind of down in the cheap zone, that I thought was interesting was where's it? Indianapolis. So the reason I look at them maybe as kind of a YOLO play is we know Ben's not good on the road, and it's an early game. There's a distinct possibility that he comes out and has a bad game, and maybe Pittsburgh only puts up 14 or 17 points, and Indy gets a couple of picks, and maybe they take one to the house. So if you're looking for just like a super high variance play, I think Indianapolis is interesting. Otherwise, yeah, I'm gonna side with you, and I'm gonna go up with those chalky defenses we talked about.
I mean, the Bears are only $3,000 too, so it's not like you really have to pay up to get them. They're just a good price. I will say, and this is very early in the week, and we'll cover this more on Friday's show when we get more information about who's going to be owned and who's not going to be owned. But Detroit is the most tagged defense so far this week, so they could end up becoming chalky.
Yeah, I think that's a good, interesting case. One other defense that kind of sticks out at me is kind of just a low percentage tournament play that could have some high upside is the Chargers in Jacksonville, because Blake Bortles, he's still not a good passer, and the pass defense for the Chargers is certainly very good. Now, granted, they've struggled a little bit with the run, but if they can sell out and maybe stop the run this week and force Jacksonville to throw, I think there's a certain possibility that the Chargers could score a touchdown on defense and end up racking up some points. At 2,700, it's not a bad play, although you're probably at around that price, you're going to look at Chicago for 3,000.
Yeah, I think Chicago is by far the safer play, but I like where you're getting at with the Chargers. Although the Jags' offensive line has been pretty solid this year, but I think it depends on how that game breaks down. If the Chargers can get a lead and Bortles has to pass, then the Chargers become an excellent play. I just don't know if that's going to happen. The other one I would look at, if I was really just punting down here, if we're convinced, even if Dez sits or Terrence Williams sits or they play or whatever, you think that they can get up in that game? The Cowboys have been pretty good at attacking the opposing quarterback so far, and Matt Ryan has been interception prone so far this season, whether it's been unlucky or just tip balls at the line. Just if you're going to get pressure on Matt Ryan and he has to throw the ball 40 times, that's not a terrible spot either.
Yeah, that's certainly worth a look. One thing that Dallas has struggled with is actually getting interceptions. I think they finally got their first 2, obviously one against Alex Smith last week, and then the week before they got one against Kirk Cousins. And those are the first 2 of the year, I think. So the fact that they get so few interceptions, I think it really limits their upside. But I think it's worth a look for all the reasons you explained, because if Dallas gets up and the Atlanta team just doesn't show up again, then it's certainly possible that Dallas could, at their price, they just need to get to like 8 or 10 points, and it's a huge win.
Yeah, I think value-wise, Chicago is just by far my favorite play here, just based on that $3,000 price tag. I have them rated inside my top 5 defenses overall for the week. And you can check out my rankings up on DKPlaybook.com if you want to see where I rank these guys without price next to them. But objectively speaking, like the Rams, the Bears, the Steelers, and the Saints in that order would be the way that I'm be playing it this week.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good order.
All right, that'll do it on the Pat Mayo Experience. Josh, thanks for being on the line, dude.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, tell everyone what they can expect to find from you, both on RotoGrinders, RotoViz, and at FantasyADHD.com.
Yeah, so my main work right now in season is going to be between RotoGrinders and RotoViz. RotoViz, I do the app work for them right now. So all the NFL apps, that's all my stuff. I've taken those and updated a lot of those. On RotoGrinders, I do a matchups piece every week that looks at adjusted matchups based on fantasy point output at every position. And then I also have my own website, FantasyADHD.com, where I have some personal apps. I have one that does adjusted matchups that I use as the background for the RotoGrinders work. I have a big air yards app where you can do a lot of different filtering and subset data on all the air yards data from this season and back to 2009. And it's they're a lot of fun to work with. So I'm an app guy. I'm not a writer. I tweet a lot. Those are my things. So if you're looking for me, the main place to find me is going to be my website and then RotoViz.
Can you explain to me what air yards is telling me?
Well, that's a good question. Air yards. I think it's still we're in the investigative process. I'll say that of trying to understand what they're telling us. So to me, what I see when I look at air yards is I look at how teams defend offenses, and I look at where offenses exploit defenses. So what you can do is look at where players are targeted on the field and get a sense for where the weaknesses and defenses are. And what I do with that is it's just pretty quick visual look for me. I make a plot and look at a histogram. And a histogram, if you're not familiar with it, is just like a bar chart type distribution that shows how many times something happens at a certain location. So I'll look at a histogram of a defense, and I can tell where touchdowns happen. I can tell where the most receptions happen. And then I kind of get a sense if I can overlay that with wide receivers or with offenses and get an idea of which players may be able to exploit defenses more so than others. So that's one way to use air yards. There are a lot of different ways that we can use air yards to judge efficiency of players. We can judge, if a quarterback's good, if they're dependent on their wide receivers, or if it's the other way around. So, I would say we're still in a discovery process on air yards. We've learned a lot. I think there's still a lot more to learn, though.
Do you find that it does the predictive nature of it from what you're using it for, have you seen it translate into some results so far?
Absolutely. Yeah, especially the visual component that I discussed. If I can look visually and see pretty quickly where defenses are, let's say weaker, at what points on the field they're weaker, I can certainly look at that versus an offense and get a pretty good idea of which players may be able to exploit that. So I've seen some success with that this season and last season, and I've continued to refine those methods, obviously. But just from a real quick and dirty point of view, yeah, I get something out of that.
Cool. All right. If you have more questions about anything, including air yards, hit up Josh on Twitter at FantasyADHD. I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me at ThePME on Twitter. And remember, subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio versions on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, video versions up on the DraftKings YouTube page. I'm Pat Mayo. Good luck in Week 10. I'll see you next time.